Real quick, to kind of get us kicked off, we're kind of asking everybody the same question to kind of get us started on these different segments. But when you look back at the success that you've had, what do you attribute that success to, and what have you kind of put together in order to become more consistently when it comes to success, especially bow hunting?
Yeah, so I'm pretty well known for being a grinder. I'm a guy who I'm out there all the time. It's pretty well known. I put in over 100 sets a year after year. I mean, I've got like 20 years of 100 sets over, and you discover a lot of things during that time. One is it's just time in the field, right? I mean, you put enough time, a blind squirrel's going to find a nut. You're going to get it done. But I have discovered things along the way, and one of my favorite philosophies, and I've done some YouTube videos on it, is my edge within an edge philosophy. And we talked about it on the very first podcast we ever did with you, is that edge within an edge. And what I mean by that is everyone recognizes that outer edge, right, where the field meets the wood line. That's the outer edge. What I'm looking for is the edge within that edge. I want to find the cover, the breaking point from a terrain change inside the wood line. That secondary transition, that secondary edge, is really where I hone in and key on. And I've killed the bulk of my deer. I killed my the one I killed last year that was kind of got a lot of press because everyone was pretty much done hunting, and I was still grinding it out. To my point, the first thing I said, I was still grinding it out. It was January 15th. I was probably on sit number 120 or so. Now I say that, a lot of people are going to go, well, God, you got to be a terrible deer hunter if it takes you. I pass a lot of deer. I mean, I kill a lot of doe. My family was featured on NBC Now years ago with Leslie Gibbons and John Stossel. We haven't bought red meat in 28 years, so I haven't. I've supplied all the meat for our family through bow hunting. I don't gun hunt; I just bow hunt, and so I kill a lot of does. I pass a lot of younger bucks, and I was still hunting and trying to fill my buck tag on January 15th, and I was sitting one of those interior transition lines. And it's like we were talking about a little bit ago before we started this podcast episode. I was actually hunting a tunnel coming out of a bedding area. I mean, it was so thick, it was briars, and you literally had to get on your hands and knees to go through the tunnel, and that's what that buck emerged out of was that. So I hone in, and that's been a key to my success, is finding those interior edges within edges. That's where I really focus on.
I'm going to be honest, I completely forgot we talked about that when we had you on, and that just made so many light bulbs in my head go off.
Yeah.
Can you give us like another real world example of what an edge within an edge would look like?
Yeah, so sometimes you'll find a patch of woods and it'll be all pines or all hardwoods or whatever, right? Well, where that patch ends is that edge, as long as it's in a greater geographic area, right? Again, I'm not looking for the field edges. I'm not looking for where, the whole CRP field ends at a cotton field or something. That's an edge, obviously. I want to go into the CRP and then find where there's a briar thicket and hunt around that briar thicket, right? Especially if it's going to be something like, 20 acres of something, or maybe 2 acres, but it's a defined area inside another larger geographic area.
Now, how does timber clear or cuts come into factor for that, as in like interior edges?
So obviously that's going to give old growth versus new growth. That's a great example to create that edge. Yep. And so that's going to be a key spot there. A lot of times we'll have not necessarily a cut spot, but some spot where just a bunch of trees just died or whatever, and you've got that edge, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And a lot of times you can zero in right there. You're going to find a ton of sign. That's where your scrape line is going to be. That's where your rub line is going to be. That's where everything's going to be. So that's what I'm focusing in.
How long did it take you to figure that out about the edge inside the edge?
Yeah, you know what? Years. It did, because I started off sitting the outer edges. Mm-hmm. That's what everybody wants to focus on, because you see a ton of does right there. You see that's where the first activity of the day is, and it's like I can look down that edge. I can look down the field line. I can see 200 yards down there. I can see a deer, and then I go home and I say, hey, I saw a deer, right? Yeah. Well, okay, big deal. You saw a deer. It was 200 yards. You had no chance at it, right? Yeah. And so when I started focusing on those inner edges, I may, I think Dan Infalt talks about it, is like he gets into hunts sometimes where he may not see a deer for 2 or 3 sits, right? And I've gravitated towards sitting for those areas. I may not see a deer for 2 or 3 sits, but when I do see one, he's going to be a quality deer.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Now, That's awesome. What do you think about that kind of habitat and those interior edges? What do you think about that makes it so appealing for a buck, especially a mature buck, to use that edge versus like a more defined edge you'd find a lot more does at?
Yeah, I think So a couple things. One is I think that edge by itself just draws them because they're edge creatures. They're diurnal. They follow the edge of day. They follow the edge of night. They're edge creatures by and of themselves. But that edge is something very subtle that they kind of go to, and it offers an escape route. It offers cover because where that transition is, a lot of times it's a good food source. And the lesser of the two edges oftentimes contains good, short green shoots and growth and food and things, but they can jump if maybe that's on the right, but they take a step to the left, they're instantly dissolved into cover. And so they've got food, cover, the natural edge drawing capacity or capability that draws them to it. They've got everything right there.
How do you see mature bucks bedding in habitat like that?
So we do a lot of shed hunting, and we're not good at it. but where we find our biggest sheds is in the thickest cover. I think we talked about that on episode time two. Is literally where I would run rabbit dogs and beagles is where I find the biggest buck bedding area at. They will bury down in tunnels, and you'll literally be going down a tunnel, all of a sudden you'll see a wide open spot where they bedded down at. I mean, it's in the middle of the thickest stuff, and sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just in the middle of super thick stuff, and that's what makes it hard. That's why I don't have 50 big bucks on my wall. I've only got what I've got, because they can go exit out of any area. They might have 5 exit trails out of that bed. And so you've kind of got to guess based on the wind direction. I'm big on hunting just off winds. I killed the buck January 15th this last year on a just off wind. If the wind had shifted 3 degrees, that buck would have nailed me. But it literally stayed, I was probably 15 yards off his exit route, and he popped in at 20 yards.
That makes sense. That actually reminds me of a spot that we're probably going to hunt in January where there's a big cattail marsh, and it comes to an island, and you got to walk in there, but I mean it's far. But you get to it, and that cattail marsh is real thick. But there's an ancient beaver dam going across
right.
it, where it's just part of the land now. It's been there for a long time. There's trees growing along it, and so that cattail marsh would be like your edge. But then that little bitty beaver dam with the trees, it's just a little bit different. That would be your edge within the edge, and right where it comes out is a tunnel, just like what you just talked. Literally a tunnel. And I put a camera on it, got all kinds of nice deer.
Really
nice buck. Found 3 different sheds that all look the same, just huge sheds that all look exactly the same from 3 different years.
In the same spot.
On that island. The island's like 2 acres.
Yep.
And, buddy, I'm going there this January.
Yeah.
We're going.
and if you can find, because a lot of times he won't come out where he's at a disadvantage, right?
Yeah.
If you can find it where it's just off, where he thinks he's safe, but you're covered as long as the wind doesn't shift. And it's a dangerous game to play. But
so that's like a spot you'd hunt with a just off wind.
Yes, exactly. I would. Yep.
Okay.
One last thing before
I know what I'm doing.
Before we get to the pack, I want to ask you one other question. How do you take access routes into consideration for some of these edges?
Huge, because I used to, I'm on, I don't know, year 33 of my hunting career or something like that. My first 20, 25 years, I was, I believed in all the scent control stuff, and, I wore rubber boots religiously. They stayed in a tote. I didn't gas up my vehicle in them, all that stuff. And I tell people all the time about this, the scenario where I actually watched a farmer's black lab trail me into my tree. As I'd been doing this for 5 or 6 years. I'd never wore those rubber boots everywhere, and I watched him trail me right to my tree. So I lost a lot of faith in the whole scent control, rubber boot, all that stuff like that. So, but the one good thing it did is it made me more religious and more conscientious on my entry and exit trails, because I've lost a couple good deer. I watched them hit my entry trail out of shooting range, and they turned on a dime and left. So now I really try to follow, if I can follow a creek system, a drainage ditch, anything like that. Now sometimes when you go way back deep into it, you got to circle around and almost J-hook like the deer's going to do in his bed to get into your tree, because that's critical. You cannot have him cross your entry trail on the hunt end, and you're going to get 1 or 2 good hunts out of that, because he's going to hit your exit trail and you're done. That site's, you burned it.